this whole NAR stuff, right? The settlement and how it's impacting appraisals. I am completely fascinated by this industry change. And I ask people, all realtors, every time I see them, how you handle this. And it is, I'm assuming at some point we're all going to be doing things the same way, but we're not now. We're not doing things the same way. Like I've had, and I'll be curious, just what you guys think. Are you, if you have a buyer and you're doing showings, are you always calling and asking what the co-broke is? Or what the buyer's?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're doing that, you're not? No? So I thought that was going to be the way we all went, but then I talked to somebody who says attorneys are advising realtors don't do that because that could be considered that you're steering to or away from a property for that.
Most
Which
of
is
what I
nice.
hear are the people doing just submitting with the offer.
Just submitting with the offer. And then that gets crazy too because you have your buyer compensation agreement at 2% and you didn't call ahead of time and they're offering 3%, you've lost 1% for yourself. Mm-hmm. So this whole topic fascinates me. I hope we get to a place where I could feel comfortable with it. And then it's, how complicated is it when it's open houses, right? Like I actually could use your education here. When you do an open house and somebody walks in as an unrepresented buyer, like that's another challenging thing, right? Like how do you handle that? And if I'm told that if they don't want representation, that you can't even write the offer, is that true? Like that you have to just give them a blank contract? Anybody?
Not 100%.
No.
You're saying you could write the contract for them even though you're not representing?
No.
No, you would write the contract on behalf of the seller, and then the seller has to
Like a
dictate
reverse
what the
offer.
terms are. But then
Okay.
the buyer counteroffers what they actually want.
I was a failed realtor before it got this hard, so I have faith that you guys will figure it out at some point. So let's kind of talk about this from the appraisal side because there's some unresolved issues on my end also. So my approach on all of this, because I get questions, well now commissions are, in the air and sometimes buyers are going to pay, sometimes sellers. My approach has been, it's not public information, right? Arizona Regional MLS no longer lists commissions at all. So my approach has been, I don't know that's not publicly disclosed. Commissions have always varied, right? There's never been something that says they have to be 3 and 3. And so this really isn't that different for me. Like it's just commissions vary from deal to deal. I've never seen an appraiser make adjustments for commissions. Why should I start now? So that's been my approach. This lady, her name is Joanna Condi. She's like kind of a retired appraiser, but she likes to still talk like she's an appraiser. She came out with something, and she's now teaching a class that says appraisers, every comp they use needs to call the agents and find out what the commission splits are. So she took that and sent it out to everybody because she runs a group called AAREA. Somebody posted it on an appraisal Facebook page, and the comments are like, no, I'm not doing that. There's no way I'm doing that. That's ridiculous. So we're at this kind of weird inflection point with that stuff. And so I'll be curious to see how it ends up. So the good news for me is Fannie Mae has not issued guidance of that. Fannie Mae is kind of like the people that make the decisions for us. They tell appraisers what they need to do. And they have not come out with anything other than to say, and you would know this, is that commissions are not concessions. And they should not be considered it. And a commission has nothing to do with the allowable, is this right? The allowable contribution to a transaction. So to me, that's a good sign. The Appraisal Institute, which has very little power, but they still have the name Appraisal Institute, has come out and said, as is always the case, anything that impacts sales prices, the appraiser needs to consider. And so they are not coming out and saying, you have to make adjustments for commissions. They're just saying, as an appraiser, you should consider it. And the example that they use is they say, a buyer's buying a house for $300,000, and they are paying their agent themselves 3%. Is that a $300,000 sale or a $309,000 sale? So they've come out and just said, that's a scenario we want you to pay attention to. What I would like you all to do and I just was on a 180 person HomeSmart call, and I said the same thing to them, I would like you, when an appraiser calls and says, what's the compensation arrangement, I'd like you to say, we don't disclose that. Because if you start doing that, they'll stop calling, and we can just kind of move past this issue. And it makes sense to me. And the broker that was on that call said, yeah, that's allowable. Those are relationships that don't need to be disclosed. In fact, they shouldn't be disclosed unless they get the approval of the buyer to do it. Because if Fannie Mae comes out and says, sorry, you need to call on every single transaction, find out what the compensation is, your deals are going to take a lot longer. Your appraisals are not going to get done in timely fashion. Because I'm not a 3 comp guy. I'm a 7, 8, 9 comp guy. And if I have to call and verify the commissions on 8 comps, and somebody's out of town for 6 days, guess what appraisal's just going to the corner of my desk for the next 6 days. So things are kind of moving. My gut feeling is there's going to be resistance from appraisers to do that. The other thing that'll happen, if you've now added 6 more phone calls or 9 more phone calls I need to make every time, your appraisal fees are going to go up. Okay, so my advice, and I'm going to start saying this on a much bigger platform soon, is just, if an appraiser calls you, be very nice about it. I'll answer any questions about the house, but we have been advised not to disclose compensation arrangements. Yeah.
So I actually have like a few questions.
Please,
And I
that's
was
why we're
hoping
here.
you would
I don't have a whole
cover
list
them.
of things to talk about.
Okay. So in relation to, first of all, your example of $300,000 house, now it's a $309,000 house. I would think it would go opposite, because you're comparing all these comps for the last 60 days, all, let's say that sold for $300,000. They all have a 3% compensation, assuming, because you can't see it in MLS. You get a contract now and the price is $300,000 and the buyer is now paying the compensation. That brings the value of the house down, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an appraiser, are you seeing, because they have to send the addendums all with the contract to you, correct?
No, I am not seeing. So again, this is still new to me. It's, you know, we haven't been in this world that long, but let's say I've seen 10 contracts that are sent to me as part of an appraisal. Most of them, I don't see a separate document that discloses compensation. So it's only if it's on the main contract that I'm looking at that I see it.
Oh.
Yeah, so kind of interesting. My preference would be keep it out of my purview. And by the way, it doesn't matter. Here's the other thing you should know. It doesn't matter to me if the subject is selling with the sellers or the buyers paying the commissions, because that never makes it over to the appraisal. If you're looking at a sales grid, we're never adjusting the subject, we're only adjusting the comps. So it doesn't matter to me if there's seller concessions or an unusual compensation structure for the subject, because that doesn't impact at all how I adjust the comps. Does that make sense? So, better example is, let's do it on concessions. If comp 1 sold with $10,000 seller concessions, I make a minus $10,000 adjustment, because I believe those concessions have led to an inflation of that sales price. If the subject sold with $10,000 in seller concessions, it doesn't change my perspective. I'm adjusting the comp minus $10,000 for those concessions. So what I'll never see, I'll see, in some cases I'll see the full contract with all the additional documents for the subject. I'll never see those for the comps. So I'll never have a disclosure like that on the comps, because it's never going to be in the MLS. It's not on the seller property disclosure statement. So I would never have that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, as an appraiser, when you're looking at the comps, you're looking at all the past comps included compensation, so that did inflate the value of all houses. But now all the contracts don't include the compensation, so you would think that now they're worth a little bit less. Are you even thinking about that? Or
I've thought about this a lot. I thought about the implications of this probably more than anyone you know.
Okay.
Like, I am fascinated by the topic. First, on your end, because I feel bad for what you guys are going through. I really do. This is a really uncertain time. But then trying to figure out the appraisal implications. And really, if I'm going to, I've never in my life adjusted compensation. We never have, because it's not concessions. And so there's been deals where it's a 3% commission, a 4%, a 5%, 6% commission. there's never been an adjustment. If I'm going to start adjusting for commission, I have to determine what the baseline is, right? I have to say, okay, my baseline is the sellers are going to pay 4.5% commission. So if it's 6%, I'm going to adjust one way. If it's 3%, I'm going to adjust the other. I don't want to be the one that decides what that baseline number is. Does that make sense?
So you're just like leaving out of it.
Putting my head as deep in the sand as I can. And again, this Condi, who I actually know, and she thinks I like her. And I actually had somebody texting me from her last class saying, like, she's saying some like things that just don't make sense, because she was an appraiser who's now a realtor. But it's super interesting. Again, I think it's better for our real estate community, for your deals getting done faster, and for appraisers as well, if you just get in the habit of saying, I'm sorry, I don't disclose compensation. One more thing. So something good that I think might happen out of all this, I was on a broker Zoom call, and Matt, the Arizona Regional MLS guy, who's been very busy, was on that call, and I kind of put him on the spot, and I said, hey, right now, if you look at MLS on closed transactions, there's a box that says commissions, right? It says seller, or not commissions, concessions. Sorry, definitely not commissions. List concessions. And right now, if I see a comp that's closed with $10,000 in seller concessions, like I said, I make a minus $10,000 adjustment for that. If I knew that that wasn't a financing concession, but rather a concession in lieu of making repairs, right? Like a Binzer issue, like where you come back with all these repairs and the seller's like, I moved to Michigan, I'll pay $10,000 of your closing costs. You guys follow that? Mm-hmm. If I knew that, I wouldn't necessarily make a minus $10,000 adjustment, because that's a condition issue also. So if I made a minus $10,000 for a concession, I might make a plus $10,000 for condition, if that makes sense. And so the Tucson MLS system breaks it down. How much of those concessions are for closing costs and how much are for repairs? Mm. And so if that was a scenario where I knew that of that $10,000, $6,000 was for concessions and $4,000 was for repairs, I'd make a minus $6,000 adjustment instead of a minus $10,000 adjustment, which could lead to a higher value. I have asked Matt on the spot, asked if that's something we could do, and he's like, yeah, I think I can do that. Huh. So you might see a time, hopefully in the near future, where we break it down separately, which again, I think can lead to some higher appraised values, which is good. All right, any questions on any of that stuff? You had more questions, no?
Can I chime in one thing though?
Please.
Okay, so on the lending side, make sure on day one or day minus one before you make the offer, let the lender know if your buyer is going to be paying anything. Because typically when a buyer calls me up, especially a low down payment buyer, they call me up and say, Ryan, I've got $25,000 in my bucket of money. That's all I have. That's all I can use. And I say, oh, that's great, because your down payment's going to be 18, your closing costs are going to be 7, that equals 25, you're golden. If it comes out that the contract gets accepted and he has to pay another 5, especially on a low down payment, it can create major problems. So make sure to let the lender know, even when you're making the offer, if you know it's a low down payment deal, to let the lender know, just so you know, we're making the offer, and he's gonna, if this offer gets accepted, he's gonna need $5K to pay me, so that the lender can say yes or no, it's good. For me, what I'm gonna do as a standard practice, just when I get the purchase contract, thanks so much for sending this. Can you let me know, is my buyer having to pay you or anybody else anything for compensation, so that I can build it in on day one? Because what's going to happen though is the Chase loan officer, who doesn't even know that this actually happened, you're going to get all the way to the end, and that buyer with Chase is going to say, oh, I have $25,000, and the closing, the title company is going to come out and say you need 30, and the Chase goes, why do you need 30? It's only 25. That's all we're charging. Oh, there's this 5,000. That's where it's going to be a bigger problem, is the lenders who don't proactively ask the question. So the way to keep you guys out of trouble, let the lender know, during negotiations, and especially once the offer is accepted.
Sure.
I don't care who pays what. All I really care about is my buyer having to pay anything out of their pocket, because it affects. They want to know how much they need out in their bank account to make the deal go.
Totally get it. All right, so I'm going to ask I know I'm supposed to be teaching a class, but again, I love environments where we can exchange. So here's the scenario. I kind of alluded to it, but I want to get your take on this. So buyer broker agreement, or is that what it is? Buyer compensation agreement. We're going to get 2%, at least 2%. That's how that's structured, right? So they write the offer. They ask for 3%. They get 3%. What happens now? Does that 1% automatically go to the buyer? Is that how that works?
Yeah.
Is that what that is? So somebody again, I'm fascinated by the different answers I get to this topic. Somebody told me that they're allowed to change their buyer compensation if the buyer's okay with it, to change it from 2% to 3%.
Yeah.
You think that's okay?
No.
I don't think it's okay.
No.
Like, I think it's, when that offer was submitted, you were under one term.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Okay, because
I mean,
people
if
think
you've
you
got
can.
If you've got a buyer broker that's got a certain time frame on it, and that time frame has expired.
That's why within the new buyer broker agreement, the new one as opposed to the old one said that you were able to get whatever was the most compensation being offered. The new one says you can't ask for more, so you're stuck at that. So that's why it'd be in everybody's best interest to obviously know their value when presenting that.
Yeah, and I just think that the person who's like, as long as the buyer's okay with it, I could go back and write a new one. I'm thinking that it's what was in effect
That's like-
at the time the offer was submitted.
Okay.
One more question, again, fascinated by all this stuff. Is hourly compensation okay? Like if some, no, it's not okay? It has to be a percentage or a set fee
It has
each
to
time?
be an ascertainable exact amount. They have to know exactly what it's going to cost. them
Arizona
hourly.
revised
They don't know.
statutes, you can't charge like a lawyer.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's always been that way? Because again, I was in another one of these broker Zooms and somebody ran that scenario and couldn't get an agent to take it, but never was told it was for ethical reasons. It was, I like my big
Although the
commissions.
DOJ wants that, but.
They do?
Oh,
They want
yeah, they're
everything.
pushing hard for that.
For hourly.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Do we bill people for it? I mean, that's
Yeah, like,
good luck collecting.
yeah.
Super interesting
What I think is
stuff.
interesting is they never really looked at the history of how we got to where we were.
What is the history?
They didn't go back into the history. Well, that's the thing. You got to go and ask the old timers that are still around. Well, how did this come about, and why was it designed this way over all these years of fine tuning? Each state's different, but
Wow, this whole thing's just, sorry. I know I'm supposed to be teaching you things, but I like learning a lot more than teaching, to be honest with you. Just super quick on the market. I expected August to be a really good month, and it wasn't. It wasn't by the numbers that great. I thought that interest rates are down, right? I thought we'd start seeing more
Yeah.
deals.
5 yesterday.
6.25. That sounds. We were at 7 at one point,
Yeah.
right?
we'll see 2 rate drops before the end of the year, and we're having another rate drop on the 18th. So
Is that right? I mean, it's an election year, and we're getting pretty darn close. So I would assume
the
that
buyers
good
are
news is
asking how
coming.
low will it go.
Is that right? What do you think we'll get below 6?
I think we'll get into the high fives.
You do?
Yeah.
That seems more normal to me. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like that's maybe where we level off. Transactions weren't great, and what I'm doing is Arizona Regional MLS closings in August was 5733. The month before we had 6200. The month before that we were at 8,000 or something, 7,000. The month before that we were high sixes. So wasn't a great month. I'm assuming title company wise, your numbers weren't great for August, probably, right? Average sales price was down also. I was surprised about that. So, yeah, not amazing in that regard. I haven't been making time adjustments. You guys know what time adjustments are? I'll just explain them for those of you who don't know. I have 3 appraisals today. And in all cases, they're saying, what's the value today? Okay? But I'm using historic data to derive that valuation. You can see the problem with that, right? Using historic data to say what a house is worth today. Time adjustments go like this. If the market's steady, and here's today, I use a comp 2 months, 3 months, 8 months, 9 months, it doesn't matter, right? If the market's the same during both of those times, I don't have to make adjustments to relate that time period to today. So in a stable market, I don't make time adjustments. Now let's talk about easy scenario. The market's going up at exactly 1% a month every month, and here's today. Here's how time adjustments work. Let's say a house sold 2 months ago For time adjustments, if you're taking notes, write this down. It's not the closing date I care about. It's the contract date. It's the meeting of the minds date. So back to the scenario, here's today. Closed 2 months ago, I don't care about that. Went under contract 3 months ago. As an appraiser, part of my process is I need to adjust for that 3% appreciation that's occurred between the meeting of the minds date and today. Okay? Works the same in reverse. We've had some of those too. If we're here and I use something 2 months, 3 months, I need to adjust down. So if you're looking at an appraisal and you see plus adjustments in the date of sale section of the report, that is the appraiser saying the market's appreciating. If you see negative adjustments, that's the appraiser saying the market's declining. We've had some crazy ups and downs where we would have a market that was going down like this, and then for 2 months it was going up like this. Time adjustments get complicated in that regard. Because if I'm doing an appraisal under contract, or if I'm using a comp that went under contract 2 months ago, I might have a positive adjustment on that one. But if I'm using a comp that's 8 months old, on the same appraisal, I might have a negative time adjustment too. It's taking the point of time when that's or went under contract and comparing it today. So I am not generally making time adjustments. I consider on something called a 1004 market conditions addendum that we have in our reports. I look at 9 different data points, and for me to make positive or negative time adjustments, I want those data points to be pretty much all in one direction or another, and I'm seeing a lot of mixed signs now. Back to the other thing I noted is listing inventory for the first time in a long time was over 18,000. I checked. I think I had a call late last week and there was like 18,600, and we had been in the 17,000s for a very long time, like months and months and months. So the jump was kind of significant, and again, I'm a supply and demand guy, and so when transactions are down in August and inventories are up, that's not a great sign. It's not what I expected for sure. Okay, so that's kind of my state of the market. What else? Yeah, please.
What would you consider a balanced market or close to balanced market right now for inventory? Like,
Well, so-
where should we be at?
I got used to the 17s. Like I said, the 17,000 something. Every month, I went, I'm going to say 6 months, never seeing it below 17 and never seeing it above. And all I'm doing is Arizona Regional MLS actives. Okay, so I'm not shocked that we're at 18,700 or whatever we are today. I just am noticing a jump that I hadn't seen. So that's all. I'm not incredibly alarmed, but when I see low transactions and increasing listing inventories, like as an econ guy, like that makes me a little nervous. That's the supply and demand curve saying, okay, that normally leads to values going down a little bit. All right, so next thing on my list of things to talk about is solar. I get that a lot. I break down solar into 3 different ways. Okay, and it's really important that you know that because it's impactful on the appraisals. Solar lease. How much value do you think I add to an appraisal for solar lease? Zero. And 2 reasons for that one. One is Fannie Mae has said we don't want to give value to solar leases. And the other reason, talking to you guys all the time, a lot of times people look at that as a hindrance. They don't want a solar lease system. Some love it, some hate it. It's complicated if they don't want it, right? They have to go and take the panels down, which is a pain in the neck. So I don't think lease solars actually add value. My exception to that, but Fannie Mae says I can't adjust for it, is solar where the lease is prepaid. Have you ever seen those? Some builders were offering those. Like at sales offices, they would include solar, but instead of them buying it outright, they would lease it, prepay it. And the reason I think that should have value is because the owner gets the benefit of the solar savings. The maintenance is included. So to me that has value, but Fannie Mae has said if it's a lease, we don't care in what fashion it's a lease, don't give value to it. Okay? So lease is no value. Second category is it's owned, but there is a loan on the panels. The panels are a collateral for a loan. Fannie Mae says no value. Okay? So, and that's the same thing. I kind of understand that if it's an assumable loan, it's kind of like a lease, right? Like they're being forced to take payments on that maybe they wouldn't want to take otherwise. One of the reasons I tell you about this is, let's say you have a transaction in escrow and you're meeting the appraiser, and the solar is loan, it says is assumable in the MLS listing, but as part of the transaction, the sellers are paying it off at close of escrow, you need to let the appraiser know. You need to let the appraiser know. Because the difference is, I'm going to give zero value if it's owned and it's being assumed by the buyers, but if it's being paid off as part of closing, I can call the loan officer and say, hey, this is supposed to be paid off as part of closing. Can I do it subject to that loan being paid off? And if the answer is yes, then I can give you value for that. And in terms of how much value, it depends on the neighborhood, the price range, the age of the system, the kilowattage. So it depends on a bunch of things, but somewhere in the $5,000 to $15,000 range. Okay.
That's the highest you would give is 15,000?
Probably. I mean, I probably have done a $20,000 adjustment for like in Paradise Valley. In fact, I can remember the one I did on Lost Dutchman in Paradise Valley. It was a massive system. Like, it wasn't just a few panels on the roof. It was massive. So I can do larger adjustments. I do something called paired sales analysis. I let the market kind of tell me what the adjustment should be. And it's not nearly as high as what the solar industry would like to tell you that it is. It's just not. Like, they have those websites where they, oh yeah, just put a couple things in there and we'll tell you what the solar system's worth. Oh, $42,000. Good luck trying to get $42,000 for your solar system. Like, when you do the math on solar, it's like an 8-year return. Like, if you think you're going to be there 7 or 8 years, solar starts to make sense, but if you're not sure, you're not committing to that, then they don't really pencil out. They just don't. What else should we talk about today? Oh, so I have some bad news for you. You know, how many of you have appealed an appraisal in your lives? Okay? All right? I have bad news for all of you. The industry is moving towards not allowing you guys to appeal appraisals anymore. Do you know this?
I even heard that part. I
Okay.
thought they were going to try to get more uniform with it.
So, Fannie Mae has come out and said, we are worried that appealing appraisals is influencing. It's trying to influence. And it slows down the process. And really, if you think about it, the only one in their minds who probably should be able to appeal the appraisal is the buyer. Okay? Because here's what normally happens on an appeal. The appraisal comes in low, right? And the listing agent gets really mad, and the seller gets really mad, and they put the appeal together and it goes to the underwriter. Meanwhile, the borrower might not even be told that that's even happening. And so what they're worried about is that appeals should only come from buyers or underwriters, and that's it. Okay? And I tell you that, and I hate that. Because I was dealing with I had a call offline with an agent the other day who has an FHA appraisal that sounds terrible. It's a single level home. 5 of the 7 comps are 2-story homes. The appraiser makes no adjustments for those things. Appraiser's going really far for comps when there's better comps that are closer. And the lender won't allow them to appeal. Said, we're not going to let you do that. And that's problematic for a couple reasons. One, because his transaction's in jeopardy. And the second reason is that FHA appraisal sticks with the property for, is it 120 days? Do you know what it is?
It's back to 180 days.
180
They
days.
go back and forth.
You basically can't take any FHA offers because they're going to go and look at that appraisal. And they were told, our policy is we're not accepting appeals on this.
So if it's clearly an incompetent appraiser, what can we do as agents?
In that regard, well, my advice to that person was, you need to get with the other agent, and you can put it all together, but have the buyer submit it. Because I can't imagine them not accepting an appeal from the buyer. So I really think that was, in that case, the only way to get resolution to that. Because they're denying it. I had another one. Here's, actually, it's Mike Broderick, who's a friend of mine, who's an agent in this office, and he's a fix and flipper. So follow this for a minute. He's a fix and flipper, and he got a call to do an inspection of the property from the lender, And he asked me about it. He says, this didn't make sense. And I go, yeah, he's probably something called a property data collector. I'll explain those in a minute to you. Let me know how it goes. So he goes and meets this property data collector. Again, I will explain them to you in a minute. And he tries to give a whole package of information. He's a fix and flipper, and he does this for a living. And he bought a townhouse in Mesa, put $60,000 into it, and is reselling it. And so he goes to give a package to this person, and they say, well, I'm not an appraiser. I don't come up with a value. I don't want this. I'm not taking this. He's like, oh, okay. Well, if you're not an appraiser, whatever, that's fine, I guess. And next thing you know, 1 week later, he gets a call from his lender. You guys ever hear of Rocket Mortgage? Mm-hmm. The Rocket Mortgage says, hey, Mike, I'm sorry, but the appraisal came in low. Came in $4,000 low. And Mike's like, what do you mean? I didn't meet an appraiser. I met a property data collector who specifically told me he's not an appraiser and he's not coming up with a value. And he's like, oh yeah, then we decided to do an appraisal. And the appraisal came in low, $4,000 low. And then Mike sends it to me and goes, can you look at this appraisal? I can't believe we're having value issues. I look at the appraisal, and the appraisal is based on the house being average condition. We call that C4 condition. It's a brand new remodel. $60,000, they touched everything. And I said, hey Mike, this will be the easiest appeal you've ever had. Submit the $60,000 in improvements you've done to the home and say, this is not a C4 home, this is not average. Get them to change it from average to remodeled, and it'll come up for sure $4,000. Guess what Rocket said? We're not allowed to appeal. We're not allowed to accept appeals on this process. That deal was going to die, except for the fact that the buyer's agent reduced his commission by $2,000 to get the deal done. Okay? So my point in all this is you need to meet the appraisers. Like, you are going to run into situations where you're not going to have that opportunity to say, hey, it's vacant a lockbox. If it comes in low, I'll just appeal. You're not going to have that opportunity forever and ever. It's going away. So the best thing you can do is meet the appraisers, bring them a package, and we can talk about that package and give them good information. Does that make sense? That's being proactive because you're about to lose your reactive avenues, which is appealing these appraisals. Okay?
So I still feel like there's got to be a way, like if you have an appraiser who's doing 2 stories against a 1 story, to raise a red flag against that appraiser so that they're required to have more training or something, so they're not going out and doing this on their next 100 appraisals.
Yeah, well, so you can, look, it's not going to solve your problem, which is you have a transaction in jeopardy, but you can always turn them into the Arizona Board of Appraisal. They're under the DFI, Department of Financial Institutions, so you can always do that. But that doesn't solve your problem today, which is I have a low appraisal that's attached to an FHA loan for the next 6 months. That's problematic. So let's talk about something else about the appeal process as long as you still have it. Again, in some cases, I don't know how the changes are being instituted, but I'm just telling you the trend is to not allow you to appeal. When you appeal appraisals, you want one of 2 outcomes. Okay? You either want the appraiser to change their opinion based on new data that you've given or mistakes that are in the report, or you want the lender to deem the appraisal flawed. And if the lender or the appraisal management company deems the appraisal flawed, then it's their obligation to throw out that appraisal and start over with a new appraisal. Okay? Fannie Mae doesn't like that. They don't like that either, and so they have done something to combat that. So what they say now is, we think that you as lenders are deeming appraisals flawed too often. And we think you're doing that so you can appease a realtor, throw out an appraisal, find somebody else to do it, and get your deals done. Do you follow that? Okay? So what Fannie Mae is saying now is, if you deem that appraisal flawed, you, the underwriter, are required to submit that appraiser to the board. You have to. Okay? And so, bad for appraisers, really bad for appraisers because nobody wants to get turned into the board, but bad for you because if underwriters do that, they've just added a whole bunch of work onto their plate. So I think there is now additional motivation to never deem an appraisal flawed. Because what if he likes that appraiser? And he thinks this isn't a great appraisal and he thinks there's some merit into deeming it flawed, but he doesn't want to ruin his career. Now he is being told he has to turn that appraiser into the board. So kind of a crazy circumstance. It's just, you can definitely tell that they're trying to move away from that. I think they think it's influence, it's the way lenders can influence by manipulating the system, and they want it to stop.
Can you casually ask them to reconsider a comp? And, it's not a formal process, but hey, could you look at this, and would their ego be in the way?
I think what's going to happen to you, what I would do, if it was for a lender and you called me up and say, hey, I saw the appraisal, could you reconsider and do this? I would say you're going to have to go through your lender. Because the lender's the client, they have their process. So I'd be nice to you, but I would say, look, at the end of it, I potentially would even tell you how I think that's going to go. Oh, wow, that's a great comp. I can't believe I missed that. Or here's why I wouldn't use that anyway. But I, in the end, would say you got to go through your lender. And the lender might just say, we're not going to let you do it. There's one other bit. I'm not here so you feel sorry for me. I could come up with a lot of other reasons for you to feel sorry for appraisers. But here's another thing that they're doing, and it drives me nuts. My understanding is either now or very soon, when you know how the lender always has to submit a copy to the borrower, correct? So now it is going to have an attachment included with the appraisal. Hey, if you feel like this value is wrong because of any sort of discrimination, here is a form you can fill out and we will take care of it from there. So now, this is what, look, I promise you, I give you my word, never in my life has my appraised value ever been impacted by who lives there. What color, I don't care at all. I've never cared. I've never known anyone who's like, there's a white guy in that house, I'm going to appraise his house low or high. Like, it doesn't happen. But now, the borrower is going to see his appraisal. People get very emotional about appraisals. I don't know if you've noticed this, especially homeowners. And now, if they don't like that value, there is a document right there that all they have to do is just fill out a couple things, and they're going to be a discrimination complaint against them. And that is, did you guys remember those stories? They were on CNN and news about how there was an appraisal done, and there was a minority there, and the appraisal came in low, and then they took out all the stuff that would maybe think you'd know who was living there, and they had the white neighbor show up, and the appraisal magically came out $300,000 higher. Do you guys remember that? Mm-hmm. That recirculated a bunch of times. It was the top story on CNN's website for a while. I have a little insight, because at that time we had a national appraisal management company, and the appraiser that got completely thrown under the bus was on our panel in Northern California. And here's what CNN forgot to tell you. That was in a market that was going like this. Things were going up so fast. And you read the story, and what you think happened was, on a Tuesday, somebody came out and did the appraisal, and on Thursday came in low, and on Friday they cleared out their house and they had their white neighbor show it, and the appraisal came in $300,000 higher. The second appraisal was ordered like 8 months later. In a market that was going up like this. That's a huge part of this equation. The other thing is that house was like on the side of a mountain, really hard appraisal. It was just a fabrication. It was a total fabrication. That lady was a really good appraiser. I haven't talked to her in a long time, but that happened. And what we're dealing with now are the consequences from that story. Crazy, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to spit out like a scenario for a home sale and kind of get your take on how you would appraise it.
Sure.
If that's okay. So let's say that you've got a fully remodeled home in an area where the houses are becoming remodeled, but it's kind of like the highest comp or the highest sale in the particular subdivision, and there is a comp that you can use. It's been remodeled and stuff, but the square footage is way off. So it's like, we'll just say 800 lower. And then outside the neighborhood, but fairly close by, there's a larger one. It kind of meets the same criteria.
Still remodeled,
stuff like that. So generally, when we do appraisals, we go in and we do the subdivision first and try to,
Great.
Go out.
Great.
Obviously, you can account for square footage, but since there's not at least 3, what would be the next step? Would you look at the work that's been done, the quality, like how much money has been put
Yeah.
into the house, and then do it not just based off of sales comps, but then, costing it out from there? How would you do this?
So that's why I'm a 7, 8, 9 comp guy, because
Yeah.
I feel like it's really hard. I feel like most appraisals aren't easy. Like most of them are complex in at least one regard. And so in this scenario, you're on the right track. I'm going to use the best stuff in the subdivision. I'm going to use the comp that sold 2 days ago that's not remodeled because I can adjust for the remodeling. What I would never do is give you comps and none of them are remodeled. Like I would make sure I have some remodeled comps. And so the process would be, all right, comps 1 through 3 or 1 through 4 are the best comps that I have that are in that subdivision. And yeah, I might use one that's way smaller or way larger and say I'm including it because it's the only remodeled sale in the subdivision. And then I'll expand my search and the main criteria might become other remodeled homes. So I kind of like the splatter technique. I'm going to give you a little bit of everything, best stuff in my location, and then also the sales that are most similar to mine. So that's why I don't know how people think they can get it all done in 3 comps. Like
Right,
I'd rather give you a lot of information. Like here's later today, I have an appraisal. I have to go to a proposed construction, Cave Creek, 8 acres. Construction costs are like $1.2 million, and the main house is 1,100 square feet. There's a guest house that's 700 square feet, but I have no idea why they're only building an 1,100 square foot home on an 8 acre lot in Cave Creek. Like that's going to be for sure a 9 comp report because I want to find stuff that's new, but that's probably 5,000 square feet or something. I want to find the best stuff with the guest house. And then my guess is if I need to find a house that's 1,100 square feet, it's going to be a house built in like the 1950s. Because why would you do that now when property values are so much higher? So appraisals are challenging for sure, and that's how I would handle that. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to just make sure you said to go talk to the appraisers as a listing agent. So in the appraisal community, is that are most appraisers on board, like they want to hear from the listing
No.
agents?
No, so there's 2 approaches to this.
Yeah.
Let's say I have 6 appraisals to do today, and they're all vacant on lockbox. The professional way to handle that is, as an appraiser, you still call every agent or every contact and say, do you want to meet me out there? But all things being equal, if all 6 of you said, no, you just go do your thing, my job's easier, right? Because I don't have to set appointments. I can go when I want. Now, if I'm finishing early or finishing late, or I want to do an appraisal barefoot, which I would never do, but like, I just go, and I can go faster. Like, I can go faster when I don't have to meet somebody there. So from a convenience perspective, I would rather not meet you, but from a, I care about the quality of my work, I like it when you meet me there. I do, and I like it when you bring a packet, and I like that we talk about that packet, and you give me a list of things that have been done that make this house better than most. I want that for 2 reasons. One, it makes my appraisals better. Like, this might be your farm neighborhood. You might have seen every one of these comps. Like, that's valuable to me, so I want that information. Or the work that's been done within the last 6 months, that's valuable to me. The other thing is I've grown accustomed to kind of looking at those as job interviews. And what I mean by that is if I'm meeting you at the property and you're giving me information and we're having an exchange, I'm like, oh, thanks, that's great information. I really appreciate that. And I'm diligent in my process and I'm thorough when I'm there. If that appraisal comes in $5,000 low, what I'm hoping happens is you call your client and say, I met the appraiser. I gave him a full package. We had a really good conversation. Seemed very professional. We can try and appeal it, or it looks pretty good to me. You know, I think I become more credible. I think my conclusions become more credible, and I think I get fewer appeals for that reason. So I like meeting you guys there, but there is an upside to not meeting anybody. Like it's just, I can go a little faster, and I can kind of. I have one of my appointments today is vacant on lot price, and just kind of go when I want. I like that. Yeah.
Question, when we have a property that's a little challenging to set pricing for, what kind of advice do you have for us, and should we pay for a appraisal? What are your thoughts, and how would you do that if you're a realtor?
Yeah, I think admittedly, we're a little underutilized in the process. Look, sometimes it's easy, but I think most appraisals have nuances and some complications. I think where we add value to the transaction or to your relationship is if you have an unrealistic seller or you just have a hard appraisal, like where there's a lot of different variables. Like the one I just finished before I came here was a townhouse that had the lake view and then beyond that the golf course view. Those are kind of tough to value. Like how much value you give for that it takes a while to figure that out. So I think we add value in those cases. Where I don't think we help is really easy deals where there's a ton of comps, or where your seller is unrealistic but doesn't care. Like says, this is what I want for my house, and if I don't sell it, I don't care, I don't need to move. I don't think we help, because it's just, they're not going to change anyway.
One follow-up question,
Yeah.
Jay. When you have a casita or a guest house
Mhm.
in the backyard, what do we need to know about that on pricing
Yeah.
and appraisal process?
Give me
on that
1 second.
structure?
Just one more thing I think we add to where I think we're really helpful and underutilized is when we measure houses, probably like 75 or 80% of the time our measurements are larger. Ours come out larger than what the county says. And if you go back and do studies, what you'll find is appraisal or listings that list appraiser as the source rather than owners as the source, they sell for more over time. And so if 80%, I can't guarantee, but if 75 to 80% of the time our square footage is going to come out larger, just having an appraiser come and measure the house. So sometimes that ties you in. You could say, hey, look, I'll pay for it up front. If you don't close, you got to pay me back. Or you pay for it up front and I'll pay you back at closing. So you're kind of tying yourself into that relationship. So we have some realtors who have us come out and measure every listing. So I think we're helpful in that regard. So on guest house, all right. For me to answer this question on how we account for guest houses, it's like a multiple step math equation. So you got to follow me on this. You guys understand the fact that appraisers hate conversations about price per square foot, right? Like I have gotten really good at my stare goes to where I'm acting like I'm caring. I can move my eyebrows a little bit like I'm listening to you, but I stop listening to you totally. I don't care at all. And one of the main reasons, if you're looking at a sales grid, if you're looking at an appraisal, we say right up top, here's what all the comps are selling for on a price per square foot basis. But included in that price per square foot is the view, the land value, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the fireplaces, the pools, the landscaping, garages, all those things that we as appraisers adjust separately, we have to take out of that price per square foot formula. All right? So the first part of this conversation is, let's just say a neighborhood selling at $300 a foot. I would expect, it's dependent on a lot of different things, but maybe an appraiser would adjust square footage at somewhere between 30 and 40% of that. So if we're saying $300 a square foot in the neighborhood, an appraiser might adjust square footage at like $100. So again, like somewhere around a third of what the neighborhood's selling for. And so what I'm saying is if we're 2,000 square feet and comp one is 1,900 square feet, how's the appraiser accounting for that 100 feet? So you follow that so far? So now let's talk about guest houses. The general premise for appraisers is guest houses are worth less. They'll be used less. They're less functional. Not to everyone. You might get a client today that says, I need a house with a guest house. Only show me houses with guest house. I know those people exist, but we're not appraising for that person. There might also be somebody that exists to say, I hate guest houses, that's where scorpions go. I don't want it, I have no use for it, I don't want to pay for it, it has no value to me. Those are the extremes, we don't care about either of them. But when we're appraising for the typical buyer in that neighborhood, in that price range, it's common knowledge to say guest houses are worth a little less. And you can add, basements are interchangeable. Okay, I feel the same way about basements as I do about guest houses. And so to take that scenario, if the appraiser is adjusting main house square footage at $100 a foot, and we're saying guest houses to the typical buyer are a little less functional and a little less valuable, we need to adjust that guest house as less. And so we might adjust that guest house at $80 a foot, okay? So that 1,000 square foot guest house is not worth $300 a foot, it might be worth $80 a foot. And so just again, if you can understand that formula, take the square footage of the neighborhood, multiply it by 30 to 40%, okay? And it's not a solid, hard number, I'm just trying to give you a good baseline. And then know that that guest house or basement probably will be adjusted lower than that number. Could be 70, 80, 90%, but it's probably going to be lower than that 30-something% of the neighborhood square footage. Does that make sense? Probably don't like it, but I just want to make sure you understand the math. Yeah.
Do you ever take into account, like, let's say you have a new build, a fairly new build, maybe even the builder is not even completed with the subdivision yet, and that house is, you know, that you're appraising is maybe on a premium lot or has had, you know, certain upgrades that the builder was offering. Do you ever take that into account for the appraisal?
Well, so when I'm appraising a new home,
well, let's just say it's now a resale, like the division. Yeah.
so it gets hard.
Yeah.
Because the waters get muddied after that house closed, and now you're talking about the resale, because it's difficult to quantify. Because you assume the appraiser is going to be using mostly resale homes, and I'm not going to know what the builder upgrades are for those comps. So I think that when it's new construction, and I go to Richmond American and I say, okay, give me 4 comps, I can look at the contracts and say, okay, we're selling with 50,000 upgrades, they're selling with 40,000. I can adjust for that. Not usually dollar for dollar, but you follow that. But it's access to data, and now when I'm appraising a house that's 3 or 4 years old, and most of my comps are resales, I'm not going to know what the builder upgrades were for those. So I wouldn't think that would have much impact on the appraisal. So good question, yeah.
Jay, when you're doing a fix and flip, or even a home that's been remodeled recently, and you're dealing with receipts, because you're going to want to see documentation. What kind of documentation do you ideally like to see? What kind of format, and what makes it easier for you as an appraiser, instead of getting all these pieces of paper?
Yeah.
And they try to tabulate, and you're like, okay, what's for real?
I like a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Give me a spreadsheet. I don't want receipts. I will include the spreadsheet and say you're the author of the spreadsheet, so I'm not making it up. I feel like if there's fraud, it's not my fraud, it's your fraud. You know. So if you want to change numbers, but I don't want receipts. My files are big enough they are already. So because we're running the end, let's talk about the package. Okay. For those of you who are buying my logic that you need to be meeting appraisers at the inspection, there's a package that I think you should complete. I would always bring a copy of the purchase contract, okay? We'll get it from the lender, but every so often, they forget to give us a counteroffer. And let me tell you what happens then, okay? I don't know if you've ever been in this situation before. So, you're an escrow, or the original offer is $400,000. There's a counteroffer at $405,000. The appraiser only was provided the $400,000 or just didn't notice the $405,000. Okay? I don't know if you've ever noticed, but there are appraisers out there that just try and appraise it exactly at what the house is under contract at. I hate that. It makes appraisers less credible. I would rather come in at $401,000 on a $400,000 so they know it's my number. But just understand, a lot of appraisers are number hitters. So here's your scenario. Appraiser comes out, you say vacant on lockbox, appraises it at $400,000. Here's what happens next. The underwriter goes back to the appraiser and says, hey, you got the sales contract section wrong. Here's the counter, it's actually an escrow at $405,000. That's usually all the underwriter is saying, and so now the appraiser's in a tough spot. Because let's say $405,000 is just as supported as $400,000. The tough spot is the appraiser knows the underwriter has a copy of their appraisal with the signature saying the opinion of value is $400,000. If he changes it to $405,000, he's just told the underwriter that he's not a very good appraiser, that he's a number hitter. I would, if I was loaning out my money, I wouldn't want appraisers that are number hitters. So they're in a tough spot. Do they just change the number to $405,000, the contract, and leave the value at $400,000, knowing that they could have appraised it at $405,000? Or do they make the change and now they have professional liability? Does that make sense? So I don't want that to happen to you. Bring a copy of the purchase contract, put the final counter offer on top, and highlight the sales price. Okay? Yeah.
I've always thought that appraisers shouldn't even get the purchase contract price, and they should completely appraise based off of what their analysis is. Has there, because I know in other countries they do that. Like
How'd you know that? So Australia was the company that ultimately bought, the company in Australia bought our appraisal management company at some point. And my understanding is they don't give appraisers the purchase contract, which you guys would all hate, by the way, because you'd have deals coming in $2,000, $3,000 low. But then they allow the lenders to like loan up to 2% more than the appraisal, which is perfect, because then you know you're getting uninfluenced appraisals.
Yeah.
But you still have the ability as a lender to loan more. So I've never known anyone that's known that. And Australia is the country that I'm aware of it. I don't
Have
think
they ever talked about doing something like that in the U.S.? Or
I
is that
thought it
just
was going to
pipe
happen.
dream?
The last time they revised our form, I thought they were going to go that way because they were trying to take influence out of the process, and they went the other way and they made it mandate that we look at every single contract. So I don't understand why Fannie Mae does what they do. Okay, so next thing, I would put together a features list. If there is any upgrades or features, I would put that in a document. I tend to scan that and include that in my appraisal. You're helping me tell the story. I'm going to make my own observations, but I might miss that it's a 16 SEER AC unit. Oh, I'll miss that for sure, actually. I might miss that there's upgraded insulation in the attic. For sure I'll miss that, unless it's FHA. So any sort of list, you might convince an appraiser to make a quality of construction or condition adjustment. The other document, and if you want to combine it, that's fine, but it's different, a chronological list of improvements. Okay? 2023, new roof, $18,000. 2021, 2 new air conditioning units, $21,000. New flooring, whatever it is, you're telling the story. And you might convince an appraiser to make a condition or upgrade adjustment based on that list. And if you know the exact amount, you can put it, and if you don't, just say you're estimating. That's helpful to me. Okay? The last thing are comps. Okay? Don't ever submit an appraisal package without comps. No matter what, if I were you, I would never submit less than 3 comps, because you will never in your life see an appraisal with less than 3 comps. And if you're that realtor that meets me and gives me 1 comp, I already know where we're going. I can see the sweat coming down your brow, like I totally already know. It's the only comp that supports your contract price, so don't do that. At least 3, maybe not more than 10. At some point I lose interest, it's just too much. So, but never less than 3. My other advice on comps, don't ignore the bad stuff, okay? You're in escrow at $600,000. The house next door sold yesterday for $525,000. You have 2 choices. You can leave that out of your package and hope that I miss it. Not going to miss it. So what I would rather you do is include it and tell me why that's bad or yours is better. Okay? It's being proactive. Okay? Like telling me, I like that. Because maybe you'll convince the appraiser not to use it if there's like real reasons it's not a good comp. So I think that's the package, and I think it just works better if you're meeting the appraiser there, you're opening up your beautiful folder and you're saying, hey, here's the information that's in here. So you're actually having a conversation with them about it. So that's taken us to about noon, but go ahead.
One more question.
Yeah, of course.
Surprise.
That's good.
So I heard, and I think Ryan, you might have seen it, and I haven't heard anything about it, but I have a friend in Texas that does a lot of contracts. And last week she had said randomly one day all her VA loan appraisals were halted until they were provided with a buyer broker agreement. Like they all halted them on one day and said, we're not going to do an appraisal for a VA loan until you provide us with a buyer broker agreement. And then I saw a notice come out from, I think it was USAA, or no, from Veterans United that said that's now
A requirement?
a requirement is for VA loans to have a copy of the buyer broker agreements.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. I'm the only VA appraiser under 90 years old right now.
And you haven't heard that?
I have not heard that.
We asked our underwriting manager yesterday, and he said,
Yeah.
no, we have not seen a VA circular on that.
Did you see that notice I posted on there?
Yeah. So Eric came in
weird.
Monday morning,
Yeah.
and we talked to Brad, our underwriting
Yeah.
manager, he's like, no, that's,
Okay.
the VA hasn't announced it. Veterans United and USA are real good about saying, this is the rule, when it's really just their
Their
rule.
room. Yeah.
But
So
they like to say this is because of the VA, it's because of that.
So if you were ordered, if you had an appraisal.
I would just do it.
You would, and they asked for the buyer broker agreement, would you have to have that?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I don't
You
want to
just do the
talk about
appraisal
that.
without
I don't want
it.
to talk about commissions. I've already told you.
Okay.
Hey, so one more thing, just because I brought it up and I forgot to bring it up, I forgot to explain it. I want to tell you what a property data collector is. Have any of you ever heard this? Property data, that's good. So Fannie Mae changed their system to a 4-tier appraisal system. The first is a waiver. It's now called value acceptance. I hate those. You guys like those, right? It just means the deal's good to go. The 4th step is a full appraisal. It's the 2 things in the middle that I just want to kind of bring to your attention. So what happens is, hey, this is a good borrower, but it's not the best borrower, so we can't waive the appraisal entirely, or whatever reason they need something. So they hire a property data collector. Property data collector could be a realtor, probably not. Could be an appraiser, probably not. Could be a convicted felon, hope not. There's no criteria at all for a property data collector. And what a property data collector is doing is filling out a 1-page form, just making some observations about the property. They're supposed to measure, but I have seen property data collection reports where they're like, I couldn't measure because there was a pool fence. Well, the realtor told me there was no lock on the pool fence. Like, you could get in there. They're just lazy. They don't want to measure. And so what happens next, that property data collector takes that, submits it to Fannie Mae, and then Fannie Mae decides, is that good enough? Or now do we need some sort of appraisal? Either a desktop or a drive-by or hybrid appraisal, okay? So Optian, which is the company that bought our appraisal management company, said about 75% of the time, they're hearing after property data collection is done, they're still ordering an appraisal. I want to explain that to you because other people aren't going to understand this, and I'm going to tell you you shouldn't agree to steps 2 and 3, okay? Because what's happening now is a property data collector is coming, and if 75% of the time they're still doing an appraisal, you don't know about it. You don't get to meet them, like that Mike Broderick story I told you earlier. They're not coming into the house. They don't need to call you. You don't get to bring them a package, and you don't get to interview them. You don't get to do anything. And they're giving you a lesser appraisal. They're doing it to save time and save money. They're not really saving either. Because if most of the time you have to still do an appraisal, now you have 2 different processes, and appraisers aren't discounting hybrid appraisals that much anyway. If you ever are in a situation, it's just about communicating with the lender, and if they ever give you some sort of notice that, hey, we only need a property data collection, if I were you, and I'm not saying this for self-serving reasons, I would say no, let's just do a full appraisal. There's no reason for us to just do these middle 2 steps. So does that make sense? Yeah.
And just one quick question. How do you feel about appraisers that come from far-flung places to do an appraisal in your neighborhood?
The number one reason I see an appraisal where the conclusion is not accurate is a lack of locational expertise. So
But how can you determine that? I mean, literally ask the person that's doing the appraisal?
you can interview the appraisers, and if you're going to interview, so, all right, I'm sorry I'm running a little long for you guys.
No,
If you're going to interview the appraisers, there's a process, okay? So let's talk about that for a second. You don't have to interview every appraisal. Some appraisals are easy, okay? Some appraisals, Surprise Farms is easy, Power Ranch is easy. There's some easy neighborhoods where you don't have to be a locational expert in those cases. But it's all the other times. You're in a historic neighborhood, you're a horse property, you're an 85254, you want to make sure you don't go to the other side of Tatum. There's nuances in so many of these cases. Interview the appraiser, okay? It's not a universally accepted practice. I would ask you, if you're taking notes, the first note you should write is be nice, no matter what, okay? Because appraisers can get kind of nasty, and they're not going to like this, and there's a lot of appraisers that think because they have a piece of paper, they can appraise anything, and your transaction's at risk if they don't know your neighborhood. You just have to trust me on this. So I would be very nice, maybe start the conversation. I mean no disrespect. You and I have never worked together before. My clients have asked that I ask you a few questions to make sure we're comfortable using you, okay? And there's 3 questions I think you can ask that will give you a good idea if they are geographically competent, if they're experienced and if they're professional. First question that I would recommend asking is, can you please give me an idea what geographical boundaries you're going to use to look for comps? That's different than, have you ever been in my zip code? Because if I'm a liar, I can answer that question all day long. But if I know your neighborhood, I can answer that question. If I don't know your neighborhood, I can't. Okay? Please give me an idea what geographical boundaries you're going to use to look for comps. That's important. Do they know don't cross Tatum? Do they know don't go north of Bell, or whatever the case may be? Do they understand those nuances? The second question that I would ask is, are you certified? About 80% of my industry is certified, either certified general or certified residential. You shouldn't ever have to work with the bottom 20% of a field, right? So when I say I only want to work with a certified appraiser, all I'm saying is I don't want to work with the bottom 20%, okay? So when we had our appraisal management company, and we were a nationwide company, we only used certified appraisers. The only exceptions to that, and they were very rare, was we were in a really remote area and the only geographically competent appraiser was licensed. But that didn't happen very often. So most companies will only use certified. If they're using licensed, they're probably paying less, and you're getting the bottom of the industry. The last question that I would ask is, I'd say, I would like to meet you out at the house and provide you a package. I just want to make sure that's okay. Okay? Every so often I hear the story about the appraisers like, no, you can't, I can't take anything from you. I want to use my lockbox. If you're going to meet me there, I want you to wait outside. Like, I don't want your information. That's an incredible lack of professionalism. That's somebody that's trying to keep you from doing the best job for your client. If you're happy with how that call goes, set the appointment. You did great. If you're not happy with how it goes, remember, what did I say first? Be nice. Still be nice. And just say, hey, let me get with my sellers and figure out a time and we'll get back to you. And then you need to call the lender and tell them the story. And I would like to get to the decision maker. So the loan officer is not the decision maker. You want to talk to the appraisal desk. VIP has an appraisal desk. Or if they're using appraisal management, you want to talk to them and express your concerns. And when we had an appraisal management company, if they were valid concerns, I would always give you a new appraiser. Okay?
Is there like a luxury designation for an appraisal?
So there's different organizations that have different designations. I don't know if there's a luxury one. I know there's a green one, like I'm a certified green appraiser, so there's that.
Should an appraiser have experience in luxury before they
Oh,
go back
absolutely. I've seen many appraisals where somebody comes from Apache Junction or East Mesa or Surprise to do an appraisal in Paradise Valley, and you know what they bring with them? Their adjustments. They appraise houses in Paradise Valley like they're appraising a house in Surprise. And in Surprise, a garage might be worth $7,500 a day. In Paradise Valley, it might be worth $20,000 a day. A view in Surprise might be worth $10,000. In Paradise Valley, Camelback Mountain, that could be $500,000. So that's where you're going to really find geographical competency is not, do you know where you can and can't go for comps? It's always, do you understand that buyer? Because all your adjustments should be based on that buyer. Make sense? All right, you guys have been great. Yeah, of course.
How do you look at roof, HVAC, and windows?
I don't.
It's-
I assume
it is-
I assume those things are functional unless I can observe that they're not. So like on windows, that is a little bit of an exception. Like if I see a bunch of the strips in the middle coming out and you can see like water stains and around a window.
So you have two remodeled homes, one has those three items updated, the other one doesn't. Two flippers, they're valued the same.
No, that is different. Like I do think there are levels of remodeling, and if I have all the information available, say one was full with electric and plumbing and one was just cosmetic, I make varying adjustments. So I can. It's just a matter of, do I know all that? Sometimes it's hard from looking at MLS photos, so that's where you can help.
So then if it's just a regular house, maybe it's been lived in for a while, they updated the HVAC system,
You're probably not going to get much return.
you're not going to get much out of it.
Where I can make adjustments for that. Where I have made adjustments for roof is a tract home in like Ironwood Village, where all the houses were built in the late 90s, and you could drive down those streets and every 8th house is getting a new roof. What that's telling me is that all those roofs have reached the end of their economic life, and you can categorize either it's been replaced or it needs to be replaced. I can make an adjustment. And, you know, but those would be
I mean,
times where you want to help.
They're old or new, they're the same, but in some instances, it makes sense that there would be more value if they were
It's
replaced,
just-
like the 2 remodeled homes.
Yeah, like track homes, it's easier. You could kind of start to tell, all right, this is how long these roofs last. So, yeah.
You said for the C4, that is like, what would like a fully renovated home?
C2 or C3?
C2.
It kind of depends. So
C1
I've
would be
kind
brand
of,
new?
if it's a really well done remodel, like we're talking electrical and plumbing, I typically call that C2. And if it's like a cosmetic remodel, I probably would call it a C3. It kind of depends. We have a 3-hour class for credit. We have two classes that might be helpful to you. We have a 3-hour class for credit, understanding the appraisal process, where we go over everything. If you have any interest in that, it's taught kind of sporadically when it gets sponsored by different people. I'll put you on the list to know about that. We also have a run comps like an appraiser class. It's an hour class where we spend the second half of the class running comps. So if you're interested, send me an email and I'll hook you up with Christina. We don't send junk mail. We'll be notifying you when there's classes. So you guys been great. Have a good lunch. Sorry I kept you for an extra 15
Thanks,
minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
my pleasure. All right,
Good
buddy.
class.
Thank you. Glad you liked it. I came in here with no agenda. Glad it worked out. I hope I had a nice group that asked a lot of questions. And I did. So how'd the last one we did together go? Did you put on the market?
I have a.
The one in Old Town? Or the one
Yeah,
at
yeah.
Cape Creek?
Cape Creek.
Cape Creek, I'm waiting on them, they actually have a partner that might want to buy that home.
Oh,
So based on
no.
your appraisal, well, they're like, hey, we'll just have you run.
Oh, good. Okay, good. So you're good either way.
Yeah, and then they're gonna go buy after that, so, yeah.
Thanks for all the work, man.